I'm Amber Mitchell, 18, and I've lived with my aunt and uncle since I was 8 when my parents died. Move-in day at Columbia was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, I stood frozen in the bank parking lot, staring at my phone. We invested your college fund in the business. Maybe for a year? After 10 years of empty promises, I was done. What they didn't realize, working in their furniture business taught me everything I needed for what came next. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit subscribe, and stick around to see how I turn the tables on the people who tried to steal my future. Life changed forever when I was 8 years old. One rainy night, my parents, Elise and Frank Mitchell, never made it home from their anniversary dinner. The call came at 11:42 p.m. A drunk driver had crossed the median. By morning, I was an orphan with tear-stained cheeks, clutching my mother's silver locket while social workers spoke in hushed tones with my Aunt Stephanie and Uncle Greg. "You'll live with us now, sweetheart," Aunt Stephanie had said, her arm around my shoulder. "We'll take care of everything." At first, they seemed like saviors. They gave me my cousin Tyler's old bedroom. He was only 5 then, and happy to share the guest room with his toys. Uncle Greg built me a beautiful oak bookshelf. Aunt Stephanie helped me arrange my stuffed animals just like they had been at home. During those first months, they mentioned my parents often. "Your mom would be so proud of how brave you're being," or "Your dad loved that book too." They kept photos of my parents in the living room and took me to visit their graves every Sunday after church. I felt lucky, despite everything. Things changed gradually. By the time I turned 10, mentions of my parents became rare. When I asked questions about them, my aunt would get a tight look around her eyes. "Let's focus on the present, Amber." They wouldn't want you dwelling on sad things. Around that time, I first overheard them discussing my parents' life insurance policy. Over $300,000 had been left in trust for me, with my aunt and uncle as trustees until I turned 18. Half was specifically designated for my college education. "It's just sitting there," I heard Uncle Greg say one night when they thought I was asleep. "We could expand the business with that kind of capital." "The trust is for Amber's future," Aunt Stephanie had replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Mitchell's Custom Furniture had been a small operation when my parents were alive, just Uncle Greg and 2 employees in a workshop behind their house. With my parents' money, they leased a showroom downtown and hired 5 more craftsmen. By the time I was 12, the business was flourishing. "You should be proud," Uncle Greg told me during my first visit to the showroom. "Your parents are helping us build something special." At 14, I started working at the store after school and weekends. Initially, I was excited. It felt like a connection to my dad, who had loved woodworking. I answered phones, organized paperwork, and eventually learned to use the accounting software. Unlike my cousin Tyler, who received an allowance for basic chores, my work was considered contributing to the family. "We feed you, clothe you, and put a roof over your head," Aunt Stephanie reminded me whenever I asked about payment. "We're saving for your future, Amber. College is expensive." When I turned 16, I requested more information about my college fund. Uncle Greg showed me a spreadsheet with a line item labeled Amber's Education Fund, $152,476.33. "We've been careful with the investments," he explained. "By the time you're ready for college, this will cover 4 years at a good school." I worked harder than ever after that. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, joined every extracurricular that might strengthen my college applications, and continued working 20 hours a week at the store. My social life suffered, but I kept my eyes on the goal: escape. When my acceptance letter from Columbia arrived with a partial scholarship, Aunt Stephanie's congratulations seemed forced. Uncle Greg immediately calculated what the remaining costs would be. "New York is expensive," he warned. "Your fund will cover it, but there won't be much left over for graduate school." "I'll figure that out later," I said, too happy to let him dampen my spirits. As move-in day approached, I noticed tension building. My aunt forgot to take me shopping for dorm supplies until I reminded her 3 times. Uncle Greg started mentioning how short-staffed they'd be without me. Tyler, now 15 and as self-absorbed as any teenage boy, was the only one who seemed genuinely happy for me. "Bring me back a Columbia sweatshirt," he requested. "The girls at school will think it's cool." 2 weeks before departure, I broached the subject of accessing my college fund. "We'll need to transfer the first semester's expenses soon," I mentioned during dinner. Uncle Greg cleared his throat. "Let's discuss that this weekend. I need to organize some paperwork first." The weekend came and went without any discussion. Then it was the final week, and still no concrete plans for transferring the money. A knot of anxiety formed in my stomach, but I pushed it down. They wouldn't actually prevent me from going. They'd been talking about my college education for years. The night before move-in day, we had a special dinner of my favorite foods. Conversation remained superficial. My aunt asked if I had packed enough warm clothes for the New York winter, while my uncle reminded me to be careful on the subway. No one mentioned the money. I went to bed that night with packed suitcases by my door and a growing sense of unease. Still, I fell asleep dreaming of lecture halls, new friends, and finally, building a life that was truly mine. Move-in day dawned bright and clear. I woke up early, too excited to sleep past 6, and double-checked my packing lists one final time. The drive to campus would take about 3 hours, but before that, we needed to stop at Northeast Community Bank to withdraw funds for my first semester expenses. Uncle Greg had finally mentioned, offhandedly over breakfast the previous day, that we would swing by the bank on the way. My best friend Megan came over to say goodbye. We had been inseparable since 4th grade, and now she was heading to state while I was bound for Columbia. "Text me when you get there," she said, hugging me tightly. "I want to see pictures of everything." "You'll visit in October, right?" I confirmed, fighting back tears. "Wild horses couldn't stop me," she promised. When Megan left, I noticed Aunt Stephanie watching us from the kitchen window, an unreadable expression on her face. She quickly turned away when our eyes met. Uncle Greg loaded my suitcases into their SUV with unusual silence. Normally talkative about everything from politics to sports scores, he responded to my questions with grunts or one-word answers. Aunt Stephanie fluttered around, asking if I had remembered my toothbrush, my phone charger, my rain boots, questions I had already answered multiple times. Tyler gave me an awkward side hug. "Don't forget my sweatshirt," he mumbled, then retreated to his room with his gaming headset. At 9:30 a.m., we pulled out of the driveway. I took a last look at the house where I had spent the past 10 years. Never quite a home, but the only place I had known since losing my parents. Despite everything, a pang of nostalgia hit me. "Northeast Community first, right?" I confirmed as Uncle Greg approached the highway on-ramp. He exchanged a glance with Aunt Stephanie. "Yes," he said after a beat too long. "We'll stop there." The 20-minute drive to the bank passed in uncomfortable silence. I scrolled through Columbia's orientation schedule on my phone, trying to contain my excitement despite the tension in the car. When we arrived at the bank, Uncle Greg parked but didn't immediately move to get out. Instead, he turned to face me from the driver's seat. "Amber, there's something we need to discuss." The serious tone sent a chill through me. Aunt Stephanie was staring straight ahead, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What is it?" I asked, my voice small. "The business has been facing some challenges this year," he began. "Supply chain issues, inflation, it's been difficult." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "We've had to make some tough decisions to keep things afloat." He cleared his throat. "The funds we had set aside for your education, we've had to temporarily reinvest them in the business." The words didn't register at first. "Temporarily?" I repeated. "Just until the business stabilizes," Aunt Stephanie interjected quickly. "Maybe a year or so." "A year?" My voice rose. "But I'm starting college today. Right now." Uncle Greg's face hardened. "We thought you might consider deferring for a year. You could continue working at the store, and we'd pay you a proper salary." The reality of what they were saying finally hit me. "You're telling me there's no money? On move-in day?" "Now, Amber, don't be dramatic," Aunt Stephanie said. "We're just asking for a little flexibility. The business is your future too." My hands began to shake. "I need to check the account myself." That won't be necessary, Uncle Greg started, but I was already opening the car door. Inside the bank, I approached the teller with my ID and account information. Uncle Greg and Aunt Stephanie remained in the car. I'd like to check my balance and make a withdrawal, I said, working to keep my voice steady. The teller typed something into her computer, then frowned. I'm sorry, but it appears your access to this account has been restricted. Restricted? By whom? The primary account holders made changes yesterday afternoon. She looked apologetic. You're no longer authorized to make withdrawals. Yesterday afternoon, while I was packing, while they were telling me we would stop at the bank today, I stumbled back outside on numb legs and confronted my aunt and uncle, who had finally exited the car. You removed my access yesterday? My voice sounded strange in my ears. You knew all along we weren't coming here to withdraw funds for college. Uncle Greg's face flushed. Now, Amber, you've been planning this. For how long? Tears burned in my eyes. That money was from my parents. For my education. Lower your voice, Aunt Stephanie hissed, looking around the parking lot. People are staring. I don't care. But even as I said it, the fight drained out of me. What could I do? The money was gone. My college dream was evaporating before my eyes. I got back into the car and slammed the door, pulling out my phone with trembling hands. There had to be someone I could call, something I could do. Uncle Greg and Aunt Stephanie spoke in hushed tones outside for several minutes before joining me. The drive home was conducted in icy silence. Once we arrived, I went straight to my room and called Columbia's financial aid office, but it was Saturday, and I only reached a voicemail. I sent desperate emails to the admissions office and student housing, explaining my situation. When I finally emerged from my room, Uncle Greg was waiting in the hallway. I've been thinking, he said, his tone suggesting he was being generous. We could help you apply to community college for this year. You could live here, work at the store, and transfer next fall when things are more stable. The audacity of his offer left me speechless. 10 years of promises broken in an instant, and now he thought we could compromise? I retreated to my room without answering and sobbed into my pillow. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, all of it had been building to this day. And now it was gone. Around 6 p.m., my phone pinged with a text from Uncle Greg. We should talk about next steps when you're calmer. The business really does need the investment right now. Maybe defer a year? That text. So dismissive of my dreams, so casual about the theft of my future, was what finally turned my despair into determination. They might control my parents' money for now, but they had taught me more than they realized during my years working in their business. I spent the next hour researching emergency student loans and work-study opportunities. I calculated how far my personal savings, about $3,200 I had managed to squirrel away from birthday money and occasional tips at the store, would get me. Not far enough, but maybe far enough to get to campus and figure out the next step. At 8 p.m., I emerged from my room with my suitcases. I'm still going, I announced to my shocked aunt and uncle. I'll figure out the money. Don't be ridiculous, Aunt Stephanie scoffed. You can't afford it. Watch me. I called a lift with my phone, ignoring their protests and threats. As the car pulled up, Uncle Greg made one last attempt. If you leave like this, don't expect us to bail you out when you fail. I looked him directly in the eyes. I've never expected anything from you that I didn't earn. 3 hours later, I arrived at Columbia's campus with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and $3,187 to my name. My hands shook as I checked in at the residence hall, half expecting to be turned away, but my housing hadn't been canceled yet. My roommate Julia was already settling in when I entered our shared room. Her side was a coordinated display of designer bedding and tech gadgets. She greeted me warmly, offering to help with my bags. My parents just left to park the car, she explained. They're taking us to dinner to celebrate. You and your family should join us. I forced a smile. My family couldn't make it. It's just me. Even better. More champagne for us, she laughed. My dad always sneaks me a glass when my mom's not looking. As I unpacked my meager belongings, I realized I couldn't tell Julia or anyone else the truth.
Not yet.
The humiliation was still too raw. Instead, I texted Megan. I made it to campus. But something terrible has happened. My first week at Columbia passed in a blur of orientation activities, introductory classes, and constant anxiety about money. I smiled through campus tours and nodded during financial responsibility seminars, all while calculating how long my savings would last before I became officially homeless. Julia, my roommate, came from serious wealth, the kind where credit card limits weren't a concept she understood. She generously included me in outings, insisting on treating me to meals I couldn't afford. I accepted just often enough to avoid suspicion, claiming I wasn't hungry other times. By day, I presented as a typical excited freshman. By night, after Julia fell asleep, I researched my options obsessively. The financial aid office had been sympathetic, but not immediately helpful. Emergency loans were available, but would only cover a fraction of what I needed. Work-study positions were already filled. I applied for every scholarship with a rolling deadline, but decisions wouldn't come for weeks or months. On the fifth night, frustrated and desperate, I remembered something. I still had the login credentials for the business accounting software, FastBooks Pro. During the summer, I had handled accounts payable while their regular bookkeeper was on maternity leave. Uncle Greg had created a user profile for me, but probably never deleted it. I opened my laptop and navigated to the cloud-based system, holding my breath as I entered my credentials. The login worked. Heart pounding, I began exploring the recent transactions. At first, I was just looking for evidence about my college fund, but what I found was far more disturbing. There was no separate account for my college fund. It had never existed as anything more than a line item in their general business accounting, labeled AM Education Reserve. And according to the records, that reserve had been gradually diminishing for years, not growing as Uncle Greg had claimed. Each reduction was coded as an internal transfer, but I couldn't immediately see where the money had gone. I dug deeper, navigating through layers of accounts and sub-accounts, following the money trail. Around 2 a.m., I found it. Over the past 3 years, as the business had grown, my aunt and uncle had been transferring substantial sums to their personal accounts. The description was always vague, partner distribution or management bonus, but the amounts were significant. While claiming the business was struggling, they had purchased a lakeside vacation cabin, $249,000, a boat, $68,000, and 2 luxury cars, combined value over $150,000. All while telling me there wasn't enough money for my education. My hands trembled with rage as I downloaded statements and took screenshots. This wasn't just a broken promise. This was systematic theft. I remembered Uncle Greg's comment about supply chain issues and searched the vendor payment records. The business was behind on payments to several suppliers, but not because of financial hardship. They were deliberately stretching payment terms to free up cash for personal expenses. As dawn broke, I made another critical discovery. In the user administration section, I found my profile was still listed as an authorized business user, with the role of accounts payable manager. I had been granted limited authority to make payments up to $10,000 during my summer work. That authority had never been revoked. More importantly, I had discovered something I hadn't known before. The business had a joint operating account at First Regional Bank, separate from the account at Northeast Community, where my college fund supposedly resided. This joint account required only one authorized signature for transactions. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms against my eyes, which burned from exhaustion and unshed tears. What I was considering was drastic, possibly illegal, definitely a nuclear option that would destroy whatever remained of my relationship with my aunt and uncle. But they had already destroyed that relationship when they stole my future. I needed more information before taking action. That afternoon, I approached the teaching assistant in my business law seminar after class. I have a hypothetical situation, I began cautiously. If someone is listed as a trustee for funds that were earmarked for a specific purpose, and they use those funds differently, is that legal? The TA, a second-year law student named Marcus, looked intrigued. That depends on the terms of the trust and whether the trustee has discretionary authority. Why do you ask? Just curious about the limits of fiduciary duty, I said, trying to sound academic rather than desperate. What if the funds were specifically designated for education in a will? Then using them for other purposes would likely constitute breach of fiduciary duty, he explained. The beneficiary could potentially take legal action. Even if they're a minor? Marcus tilted his head. Once they're no longer a minor, yes. There's usually a statute of limitations that would start running from when they reach majority or discover the breach. He studied my face. This doesn't sound hypothetical, Amber. I forced a laugh, just trying to understand the concepts better. That evening, I visited the university library and used their legal databases to research trust law. I searched for copies of my parents' will, which should have been public record after probate. After several hours, I found it. The language was clear. 50% of the proceeds from our life insurance policies shall be held in trust for our daughter, Amber Mitchell, to be used exclusively for her post-secondary education expenses. There was no provision granting my aunt and uncle discretion to invest these funds in their business. No provision allowing them to defer my access until it was convenient for them. They had violated the trust. They had violated my parents' wishes. They had violated the law. The next morning, I visited the financial aid office again, this time with a concrete explanation of my situation. I showed them the evidence I had gathered about the misappropriated trust funds. This is quite serious, the counselor said, reviewing my documents. Have you considered legal action? I'm exploring all options, I said carefully. She nodded. Given these exceptional circumstances, we can offer emergency gap funding while you resolve this situation. It won't cover everything, but it should help with immediate expenses. It was the first piece of good news in days. That afternoon, I also secured a part-time job at the campus bookstore, minimum wage, but better than nothing. As I walked back to my dorm, a plan was forming in my mind. I had the authority. I had the evidence. I had the moral high ground. That night, I drafted a formal demand letter to my aunt and uncle with the help of a template from the university's legal aid website. I outlined the trust violations, documented the misappropriation, and demanded immediate release of the funds designated for my education. I sent it to their email addresses with all the evidence attached. Uncle Greg's response came within hours. Don't threaten us with legal mumbo-jumbo you don't understand. We've done everything for you. This is how you repay us? By making ridiculous accusations? Good luck paying for a lawyer with no money. Aunt Stephanie followed up with an emotional appeal. We're hurt that you would turn on family like this. After all we've sacrificed for you, your parents would be so disappointed. That last line, invoking my parents to manipulate me, was what finally resolved any lingering doubts. I had given them one last chance to do the right thing. They had chosen differently.
So would I.
The day after receiving my aunt and uncle's dismissive responses, I woke with a strange sense of calm. The anxiety and anger that had churned inside me for days had crystallized into determination. I would recover what was rightfully mine. Not a penny more, not a penny less. First, I needed to be absolutely certain about the legal aspects. Using the campus Wi-Fi, I researched business account access laws and fiduciary responsibilities. I documented every finding meticulously, creating a digital trail that showed I had done my due diligence. Between classes, I visited the university's legal aid office. Columbia offered limited free legal consultation to students, typically for issues like tenant disputes or minor legal troubles. My situation was outside their usual scope, but the law student on duty agreed to review my documents. This is complex, she admitted, scanning the will excerpts and account records. But based on what you've shown me, you have a strong case for breach of fiduciary duty. Your aunt and uncle were legally obligated to use those trust funds for your education. What about accessing the business account? I asked carefully. If I'm still listed as an authorized user? She hesitated. That's trickier. Technically, if you have legitimate authorization, you can access the account. But the intent matters. I'd strongly recommend consulting with a practicing attorney before taking any action that could be construed as retaliatory. I thanked her and left with her warning echoing in my mind. But professional legal representation costs money, the very thing I didn't have. That afternoon, I received another email from Uncle Greg, apparently sent to my entire extended family. We're concerned about Amber's mental state. She's making wild accusations and threatening legal action against us. We've only ever wanted what's best for her, but she's become increasingly unstable. Please reach out to her and encourage her to come home before she does something she'll regret. My phone immediately lit up with concerned messages from relatives who had barely spoken to me in years. Most took my aunt and uncle's claims at face value. A few expressed confusion. Only my grandmother, my father's mother, asked for my side of the story. I sent her copies of everything: the will, the account records, the evidence of their luxury purchases, and our recent email exchanges. I always wondered about that money, she replied hours later. Your father was meticulous about providing for you. I should have asked more questions when Stephanie and Greg suddenly expanded their business. I'm so sorry, Amber. Her support strengthened my resolve. That night, I made a detailed inventory of the misappropriated funds, calculating exactly how much had been earmarked for my education. The total came to $151,237.82. Not the full $152,476. 33 that Uncle Greg had once shown me on a spreadsheet, but close enough that I was confident in my calculation. This wasn't about punishing them or taking extra. This was about recovering precisely what was mine. The next step was securing the technical aspects. I changed all my passwords and set up two-factor authentication on every account. I created encrypted backups of all evidence. I downloaded the mobile banking app that would allow me to access the business account remotely. Throughout all this preparation, I continued attending classes, completing assignments, and working at the bookstore. My professors commented on my focus and engagement, unaware of the parallel track my life was running on. Julia noticed my late nights but assumed I was studying. You're so dedicated, she said admiringly one evening. I can barely stay awake through the reading assignments. I forced a smile, just trying to stay on top of things. On Thursday evening, a week after discovering the truth about my fund, I received an unexpected visitor. Tyler showed up at my dorm, looking uncomfortable in the university environment. Mom and Dad don't know I'm here, he said as we sat on a bench outside my residence hall. They think I'm at basketball practice. Why did you come? I asked, genuinely curious. Tyler and I had never been particularly close. He scuffed his shoe against the pavement. They've been fighting nonstop since he left. Dad's freaking out about something with the business accounts. Mom keeps saying they should just give you some money to shut you up. He looked up at me. What's really going on, Amber? I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression morphing from skepticism to shock to anger. That's so messed up, he said when I finished. I had no idea. I mean, I knew the cabin and boat were expensive, but I thought the business was doing really well. It was, I confirmed, just not well enough to justify those expenses while denying me my college fund. He was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I studied his face, considering how much to reveal. Tyler was still a kid in many ways, caught between his parents and his sense of right and wrong. I'm going to make sure I can stay in school, I said finally. That's all I can say right now. He nodded slowly. I think my parents are wrong about this. But they're still my parents. I understand, I said, and I did. You don't have to take sides. After Tyler left, I felt both heartened by his visit and more certain of my course. Even their own son recognized the injustice, though his loyalty remained understandably divided. That night, I finalized my plan. At 8 a.m. the following morning, when the bank opened but before the furniture store did, I would access the joint business account. I would transfer exactly $151,237.82 to a new account I had opened at a different bank. I would document everything meticulously, and I would leave them a detailed accounting of exactly what I had taken and why. I barely slept, alternating between conviction that I was doing the right thing and terror that I was making a catastrophic mistake. Around 4 a.m., I opened my laptop one final time and wrote a journal entry. I never wanted it to come to this. All I asked was for what my parents intended for me, the education they valued so highly. Aunt Stephanie and Uncle Greg made a choice when they took my fund. Now I'm making mine. This isn't theft, it's recovery. This isn't revenge, it's justice. And after tomorrow, whatever happens, I'll know I stood up for myself when no one else would. I closed the laptop and finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, my alarm set for 7:30 a.m. The morning light filtered through my dorm room blinds as my alarm chimed at 7:30 a.m. Julia was still asleep, her gentle snores providing a mundane backdrop to what I was about to do. I silenced the alarm quickly and sat up, surprised by how clear-headed I felt despite having slept only a few hours. This was it, the point of no return. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing a professional-looking blouse and slacks rather than typical college attire. If this day ended with legal consequences, I wanted to at least look like someone who had taken the matter seriously. At precisely 7:55 a.m., I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The business didn't open until 10 a.m., and Uncle Greg rarely checked the accounts before his morning coffee at 9:30. I had a narrow window of opportunity. First, I logged into my email and sent a pre-written message to my aunt and uncle. I am exercising my right to recover the funds designated for my education in accordance with my parents' will. A full accounting of the exact amount and supporting documentation is attached. I remain an authorized user on the business accounts as you never revoked my access after my summer employment. I am only taking what is legally mine, no more, no less. I attached PDFs of all the evidence I had gathered. The will excerpts, the trust provisions, the misappropriated fund records, and a spreadsheet showing my calculations of the $151,237.82 total. Next, I logged into the FastBooks Pro accounting system and created a new journal entry labeled Recovery of AM Education Trust Funds, with detailed notes explaining the transaction. This would ensure a clear paper trail within their own system. At 8 a.m. sharp, I logged into the First Regional Bank business portal using my still active credentials. My heart pounded as I navigated to the transfer section. The joint operating account showed a balance of $382,456.19, more than enough to cover what I needed without disrupting their ability to make payroll or pay vendors. I carefully entered the transfer amount, $151,237.82. Not a penny more. In the memo field, I wrote, Recovery of Misappropriated Education Trust Funds per Ease and F. Mitchell will. My finger hovered over the submit button. Was I really going to do this? Was there any other way? I thought of my parents, how hard they had worked, how carefully they had planned for my future. I thought of my aunt and uncle enjoying their lakeside cabin while telling me there wasn't enough money for my education. I thought of Uncle Greg's dismissive text, maybe defer a year? I pressed submit. The system asked for my security token, a 6-digit code from the Authenticator app on my phone. I entered it with steady fingers. Transfer processing. The screen read, before changing to transfer complete. Confirmation #TR 202310118-7842. It was done. I quickly took screenshots of the confirmation page and saved them to my secure cloud storage. Then I logged into my new bank account to verify the incoming transfer was pending. It was 8:07 a.m. 7 minutes to potentially change the course of my life forever. Next, I sent emails to the 3 main business partners that Mitchell's Custom Furniture worked with. I had met them all during my time working at the store and had their contact information. I wanted to inform you of a family matter that might temporarily affect the business operations, I wrote. There has been a disputed fund recovery related to my parents' estate. This should not affect your relationship with the company, but in the interest of transparency, I wanted you to be aware in case there are any short-term disruptions. Professional, factual, non-inflammatory. I was careful not to make accusations or damage the business's reputation. Finally, I sent a notification to First Regional Bank's fraud department. This is to inform you that I, Amber Mitchell, have today made a transfer from the Mitchell's Custom Furniture operating account, on which I am an authorized user. This transfer recovers funds that were held in trust for my education. I anticipate that the primary account holders may dispute this transaction. I am providing documentation to show that this was a legitimate recovery of misappropriated trust funds, not fraudulent activity. I attached the same evidence I had sent to my aunt and uncle. By 8:25 a.m., everything was complete. I closed my laptop, exhaled slowly, and waited. The first call came at 9:42 a.m. Uncle Greg. I let it go to voicemail. His message was explosive. What the hell have you done? You better reverse this right now, or I'm calling the police. This is theft. 3 more calls followed in rapid succession. I ignored them all but listened to the increasingly frantic voicemails. At 10:17 a.m., I received an email from First Regional Bank acknowledging receipt of my documentation and informing me they had placed a temporary hold on all transactions from the business account pending resolution of the dispute. That wasn't part of my plan. I had only intended to recover my funds, not freeze their entire operation. But it made sense that the bank would take precautionary measures. At 10:30 a.m., I decided to answer Uncle Greg's 5th call. How dare you, he began shouting immediately. I only took what was mine. I interrupted, keeping my voice calm and steady. The money my parents left specifically for my education. You've frozen our entire account, he yelled. We can't make payroll. We can't pay vendors. That was the bank's decision, not mine, I explained. I've provided them with documentation showing I was only recovering misappropriated trust funds. Once they verify that, they'll likely release the hold. This is illegal. It's theft. I'm calling our lawyer right now. Please do, I said. I'm sure they'll be interested in how you violated fiduciary duty by using my education trust for personal purchases like your lake cabin and boat. That gave him pause. How did you? I have all the records, Uncle Greg. Every transfer, every purchase, every lie. I sent you copies this morning. You ungrateful little. He cut himself off. I could hear him breathing heavily. We gave you everything. A home, clothes, food. My parents paid for all of that in advance, I countered. And you've been dipping into what was left for years. I didn't take a penny more than what was designated for my education. He switched tactics. Your aunt is devastated. She's crying her eyes out. Is that what you wanted? The attempt at emotional manipulation might have worked a week ago. Not anymore. What I wanted was to go to college without having my future stolen on move-in day. What I wanted was for you to honor my parents' wishes. What I wanted was to trust my family. Silence stretched between us. If you reverse this, he finally said, his voice lower, we can work something out. A payment plan for your tuition, maybe. No, I said firmly. I don't trust your promises anymore. The funds are where they belong now, securing my education, as my parents intended. This isn't over, he warned before hanging up. My phone rang again almost immediately. Aunt Stephanie this time. I answered, bracing myself. How could you do this to us, she sobbed. After everything we've done for you? I'm only taking what was already mine. I explained again. Do you have any idea what this will do to the business? To our reputation in the community? That depends on how you choose to handle it, I pointed out. This could be resolved quietly and professionally, or it could become very public. That's up to you. Your parents would be ashamed of you, she said coldly. The accusation hit harder than I expected, but I held firm. My parents wanted me to get an education. They provided for it specifically in their will. I'm honoring their wishes. The conversation ended much like the one with Uncle Greg, with threats and recriminations. But beneath the anger, I detected something else. Fear. They knew I had them cornered with evidence of their misdeeds. Throughout the day, messages poured in from family members. Most sided with my aunt and uncle, having heard only their version of events. A few asked questions, seeming unsure what to believe. My grandmother sent a simple text. Stand your ground. Your father would be proud. By evening, the situation had escalated. Uncle Greg had indeed contacted their lawyer, who sent me a formal letter demanding return of the stolen funds and threatening legal action. I forwarded it to the legal aid office with a request for guidance. The student attorney who had helped me previously responded within hours. Their claim is undermined by the trust provisions in your parents' will. Your documented status as an authorized user on the account also weakens their case substantially. That said, you should expect them to fight this. Would you like me to refer you to an attorney who might take your case on contingency? I accepted the referral gratefully. Meanwhile, Tyler sent me a text from a new number. How to get a prepaid phone. Parents took mine away when they found out I visited you. House is chaos. Dad keeps saying he'll destroy you if it's the last thing he does. Be careful. The warning was concerning, but not surprising. I thanked Tyler and assured him I had taken precautions. That night, Julia noticed my distraction. Is everything okay? You've been on your phone nonstop. Family drama, I said, which wasn't a lie. It's complicated. I get it, she sympathized. My parents divorced when I was 12, and it was World War III for years. Let me know if you need anything. I nodded gratefully, touched by her concern despite not knowing the full story. As I tried to sleep that night, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from First Regional Bank. After reviewing the documentation provided by all parties, we have determined that the disputed transfer appears to be related to a private trust matter rather than fraudulent account activity. Accordingly, we have lifted the freeze on the business operating account. However, we recommend all parties seek appropriate legal counsel to resolve this matter conclusively. It was a small victory. The bank wasn't reversing my transfer, at least not immediately. But I knew the battle was far from over. Uncle Greg's final text of the day confirmed it. You've made a powerful enemy today. Hope college teaches you how to survive what's coming. Despite the threat, I slept surprisingly well. For the first time since move-in day, I felt a sense of control over my future. Whatever came next, I would face it knowing I had stood up for myself. The morning after the transfer, my phone began ringing at 7 a.m. with a number I didn't recognize. I declined the call and checked my email instead. My inbox contained 3 messages from Mitchell's Custom Furniture business partners, all expressing concern about the situation. Marco Diaz from Artisan Wood Suppliers wrote, "Got a strange call from Greg this morning about account issues. Says there might be delays in payment. Is everything okay with the business?" Similar messages from their leather upholstery supplier and logistics partner indicated Uncle Greg was already dealing with the fallout of my actions. While I hadn't intended to disrupt the business operations, it was an inevitable consequence. I responded to each message professionally, reiterating that this was a family trust matter that should be resolved soon. I emphasized that the business itself remained solvent and operational. As I prepared for my 9 a.m. economics class, my phone rang again. This time it was Tyler's prepaid phone. "Amber, it's crazy here," he said in a hushed voice. "Dad's been on the phone all morning with suppliers and the bank. Mom's calling everyone in the family telling them you've had some kind of mental breakdown. Are you okay?" I asked, concerned about how the situation was affecting him. "Yeah, I'm staying out of the way. But that's not why I called. Dad's saying he's going to drive up to campus today to straighten things out in person. I thought you should know." My stomach dropped. "Thanks for the warning. When is he planning to come?" "After he deals with some business emergency. Probably early afternoon." I thanked Tyler and immediately contacted campus security. I explained that I was having a family dispute over finances and had reason to believe my uncle might come to campus to confront me. I didn't want to file a formal complaint but asked if they could be aware of the situation. "We can have an officer in the vicinity of your residence hall this afternoon," the security officer assured me. "And you can call our direct line if he arrives and you feel uncomfortable." I also alerted my RA, without going into details, that I might have a difficult family visitor and would appreciate her presence if needed. With those precautions in place, I tried to focus on my classes, but my mind kept returning to the impending confrontation. During lunch at the campus cafe, I received a series of text messages from extended family members. My cousin Brooke. Aunt Stephanie says you stole from them? What's going on? My mother's sister, Aunt Diane, whom I rarely heard from. Very concerned about what we're hearing. Please call us. My father's brother, Uncle Paul. I always had questions about how Greg and Stephanie handled your parents' estate. Let me know if you need support. I responded to Uncle Paul first, grateful for the unexpected ally. I provided him with the same documentation I had sent the others, and he replied almost immediately. This confirms my suspicions. Your father would never have wanted his hard-earned money spent on Greg's toys while your education went unfunded. I'm with you on this. By early afternoon, as I sat in the library between classes, my phone lit up with a call from the main reception desk of my residence hall. Ms. Mitchell, there's a Gregory Mitchell here asking to see you. He says he's your uncle. Despite expecting this, my heart raced. Yes, I was anticipating his visit. Could you please notify the RA on duty as I discussed this morning? I'll be down in 5 minutes. I gathered my belongings and took a moment to center myself. This confrontation was inevitable, but I would control how it unfolded. When I reached the lobby, Uncle Greg was pacing impatiently. A campus security officer stood unobtrusively near the entrance, and my RA, Jessica, was behind the reception desk. Uncle Greg spotted me and stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Amber, we need to talk. Privately. We can talk here, I said calmly, indicating a small seating area in the corner of the lobby. This is family business, he insisted through clenched teeth. Not for public discussion. I'm not leaving the building with you, I stated firmly. Either we talk here or not at all. He glanced at the security officer, seemingly noticing him for the first time, then reluctantly followed me to the seating area. You need to fix this, he began immediately, keeping his voice low but intense. The bank has released our account, but 3 vendors are demanding immediate payment because of your little email stunt. Our reputation. This isn't about your reputation, I interrupted. It's about the trust funds you misappropriated. We did not misappropriate anything, he hissed. We managed those funds as we saw fit, which was our right as trustees. The will specified the money was for my education, I countered. Not for your cabin, boat, or luxury cars. His eyes widened slightly. You have no proof. I have every transaction record for the past 10 years, I said. Every transfer from my education fund to your personal accounts. Every major purchase. Would you like me to show you? He fell silent, reassessing me. I wasn't the compliant niece he had expected to manipulate with his presence. Look, he finally said, adopting a more reasonable tone. We can work this out. Maybe we were overzealous in some of our spending. But freezing our account and contacting our business partners was completely uncalled for. I didn't freeze your account. The bank did that as a precaution. And I only contacted your partners to provide context for any disruptions. I was being professional. Professional, he scoffed. There's nothing professional about stealing, recovering, I corrected. Recovering what was already mine. Our conversation continued in this circular pattern for nearly 30 minutes. He alternated between threats, appeals to family loyalty, and grudging offers of compromise. I remained steadfast. The money was rightfully mine, and I had only taken what was specifically designated for my education. Finally, seeing he wasn't making progress, Uncle Greg stood. This isn't over, Amber. Not by a long shot. We've contacted our lawyer, and you'll be hearing from him soon. I look forward to explaining to a judge exactly how you spent my college fund, I replied evenly. As he stormed out, Jessica approached me. Are you okay? That looked intense. I'm fine, I assured her, though my hands were shaking slightly. Family business. If you need anything, just let me know, she offered. Back in my room, I found Julia sorting through her clothes. Hey, was that your dad I saw in the lobby? He looked kind of upset. My uncle, I corrected. And yes, we're having a disagreement about some family financial matters. She nodded without pressing for details. Well, I'm heading to the library. Want to come? might take your mind off things. I declined politely, needing time to process the confrontation. Once alone, I called the lawyer recommended by the legal aid office, Marissa Thornton, who specialized in trust disputes. "Based on what you've told me and the documentation you've provided," she said after hearing my story, "you have a strong case that your aunt and uncle breached their fiduciary duty. However, the way you recovered the funds is unorthodox. Was it illegal?" I asked directly. "Not clearly, given your authorized user status on the account," she explained. "But it's certainly in a gray area that a judge might view differently, depending on the circumstances. That said, I think we can defend your actions given the evidence of their misappropriation." She agreed to represent me if formal legal proceedings began, with a reduced rate given my financial situation. That evening, Tyler called again. "Mom showed up at school and took me out of class early. She's saying we need to present a united family front against you. They're talking about filing a police report for theft." "They won't," I said with more confidence than I felt. "A police report would make everything public record, including how they spent the trust money. Their lawyer will advise against it." "I hope you're right," he said, "because they're really, really angry." The next day brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Uncle Greg had apparently contacted Columbia's administration, claiming I was experiencing a mental health crisis and requesting their intervention. I was called to the Student Affairs office, where a concerned counselor explained the situation. "Your uncle has expressed serious concerns about your well-being and decision-making capacity." "I'm sure he has," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. I then provided her with the same documentation I had shown others: the will excerpts, the misappropriated funds, the legal consultation summary. "I see," she said after reviewing the materials. "This appears to be a legal dispute rather than a mental health concern. While we're always here to support your well-being, the university won't be intervening in what seems to be a private legal matter." Relief washed over me. Uncle Greg's attempt to use the university against me had failed. Later that day, a formal letter arrived from their lawyer, demanding return of the funds and threatening a lawsuit for conversion of business assets if I didn't comply within 72 hours. I forwarded it to Marissa, who responded quickly. "As expected. Don't worry, their position is weak given the evidence. I'll draft a response explaining why their demand is unjustified and outlining our counterclaim for breach of fiduciary duty." Over the next few days, the situation evolved rapidly. Several more family members contacted me after receiving documentation from either my grandmother or Uncle Paul, who had both become vocal advocates for my position. The tide of family opinion was beginning to shift. Meanwhile, I focused on my classes and job, refusing to let the situation derail my education, the very thing I had fought so hard to secure. A week after the transfer, I received an unexpected email from Aunt Stephanie. "Amber, this situation has gotten out of hand. Greg is obsessed with fighting you, but our lawyer has advised us that our position isn't as strong as we thought. Would you be willing to discuss a settlement? We want to resolve this without further damage to the family or the business." I consulted with Marissa before responding. "I'm open to discussion, but any resolution must guarantee the security of my education funding and address the breach of trust. I suggest we meet with our respective legal representatives present." 2 days later, we convened in a conference room at Marissa's office. Uncle Greg, Aunt Stephanie, and their lawyer sat across from Marissa and me. The tension was palpable. Their lawyer spoke first. "Our clients acknowledge that there may have been some irregularities in how the trust funds were managed. However, they maintain that as trustees, they had certain discretionary authority." "The will explicitly stated the funds were for Amber's education," Marissa countered. "There was no discretionary authority to use them for personal purchases or business investments." After hours of negotiation, we reached a tentative agreement. I would retain the recovered funds for my education. They would acknowledge in writing that these funds represented the full and proper disbursement of my parents' educational trust. In exchange, I would sign a confidentiality agreement about the dispute and remove my documentation from their business partners' files. As we reviewed the draft agreement, Uncle Greg made one last attempt to regain control. We'll need oversight of how these funds are spent, he insisted, to ensure they're used properly for education. Absolutely not, Marissa responded before I could. My client is a legal adult. The funds are hers to manage, as they should have been upon her 18th birthday. Aunt Stephanie placed a restraining hand on Uncle Greg's arm as he opened his mouth to argue. Let it go, Greg. It's over. The fight seemed to drain out of him suddenly. He looked older than I had ever seen him, the consequences of his actions finally catching up. As we prepared to sign the agreement, I looked directly at both of them. This was never what I wanted. All I asked was for you to honor what my parents intended. Uncle Greg wouldn't meet my eyes, but Aunt Stephanie looked at me with a mixture of resentment and something that might have been shame. We did what we thought was best, she said weakly. For yourselves, I corrected quietly. Not for me, and not for what my parents wanted. With that, we signed the agreement. The legal battle was over, but the family wounds would take much longer to heal, if they ever did. 1 month after signing the settlement agreement, I sat on a bench overlooking Columbia's main quad, watching students hurry to classes or lounge on the grass enjoying the autumn sunshine. My own life had finally settled into something resembling normality, attending lectures, working at the bookstore, making friends, and planning for midterms. The funds from my parents' trust were now securely in my control, carefully budgeted across 8 semesters with allocations for housing, meals, books, and emergency expenses. After years of uncertainty, I found profound comfort in this financial stability and independence. My relationship with my aunt and uncle remained strained, limited to brief, formal emails about necessary family matters. They had maintained their distance since the settlement, neither apologizing nor seeking reconciliation. The business had apparently recovered from the temporary disruption, though Uncle Paul mentioned they had sold the boat and listed the vacation cabin for sale. Tyler and I communicated regularly through his new officially sanctioned phone. Initially caught in the middle of the conflict, he had gradually come to understand my position. Dad never talks about what happened, he told me during our last call. But Mom said something about them, learning a hard lesson about consequences. I think they know they messed up, even if they'll never admit it. The most unexpected development came 3 weeks after the settlement, when I received a package from my grandmother. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, letters my mother had written to me before I was born and during my early childhood. Stephanie was supposed to give these to you years ago, my grandmother's note explained. I found them when helping clean out their attic last week. They belong with you. Reading my mother's words, her hopes for my future, her unwavering belief in the importance of education, her dreams of the woman I might become, brought both healing tears and renewed purpose. One passage particularly stood out. Whatever path you choose, my darling girl, education will open doors that nothing else can. Your father and I both had to work so hard for our opportunities. We want yours to come more easily, which is why we're planning so carefully for your future now. Knowledge is the one inheritance that can never be taken from you. The irony of those words wasn't lost on me. My parents had indeed planned carefully. It was the trustees of their wishes who had failed. In the weeks that followed, I connected with several of my parents' old friends who reached out after hearing about the dispute. They shared stories I'd never heard, photos I'd never seen, and perspectives on my parents that my aunt and uncle had never offered. Through these connections, I began reconstructing a more complete picture of who my parents had been, not just as mother and father, but as friends, colleagues, and community members. Dr. Harris, my university-provided therapist, helped me process the complex emotions surrounding the entire experience. What you're describing is a compound loss, she explained during one session. First, the loss of your parents, and then the loss of trust in the people who were supposed to honor their wishes for you. I still feel angry sometimes, I admitted. Not just about the money, but about how they tried to control my future. That anger is valid, she assured me. The question is whether holding on to it serves your growth or hinders it. That perspective helped shape my approach to healing. I wouldn't force forgiveness before I was ready, but neither would I allow bitterness to define my college experience or future relationships. My academic life flourished despite the rocky start. Professors commented on my thoughtful contributions to discussions, and I found particular interest in my business law and ethics classes. The real-world experience I'd gained through my own legal battle gave me insights that textbooks alone couldn't provide. You should consider law school, my economics professor suggested after reading my analysis of a case study. You have a natural talent for identifying the ethical dimensions of financial decisions. The idea resonated more than I expected. Perhaps someday I could help others navigate the complex intersections of family, finance, and legal obligations, turning my painful experience into something constructive. New friendships formed naturally once I no longer carried the secret burden of my financial crisis. Julia remained my closest companion on campus, but I also connected with diverse classmates who shared my interests in literature, hiking, and community service. These relationships, built on honesty rather than necessity, felt refreshingly authentic. During a study group session in late October, I found myself explaining compound interest to two classmates struggling with the concept. "You're a good teacher," remarked Zach, a fellow freshman. "Way better than Professor Jenkins." "I had to learn this stuff early," I said, before adding something I wouldn't have shared a month earlier. "My parents died when I was young, and managing their trust taught me a lot about finance, sometimes the hard way." "I'm sorry about your parents," he said, genuinely. "But it's cool that you turned that experience into knowledge that helps others." His comment stayed with me, crystallizing something important. I could define how my story shaped me. The pain and betrayal were real, but they didn't have to be the only legacy of what happened. In November, I established firm boundaries with extended family members who had initially sided with my aunt and uncle without hearing my perspective. "I'm open to rebuilding relationships," I wrote in a group email, "but I need acknowledgement of how hurtful it was to be prejudged without facts." Many responded with apologies and efforts to reconnect. Some remained distant. I accepted both outcomes with a growing sense of peace, understanding that I couldn't control others' responses, only my own. Looking toward the future, I began researching summer internships that would complement my interest in business ethics and trust law. I also started a small fund for my bookstore earnings, setting aside a few dollars each week toward a long-term goal. Establishing a scholarship for students who had lost parents and faced financial challenges in accessing higher education. The amount was symbolic for now, barely enough for a textbook, but the act of creating it represented my commitment to breaking cycles of financial control and creating opportunity for others. One evening in early December, as the semester neared its end, I walked back to my dorm after a late study session at the library. Campus was quiet, the buildings outlined against the night sky, and I felt a sudden, powerful sense of belonging. Despite everything that had happened, or perhaps because of it, I knew with certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. In my room, I opened my journal and wrote, 10 years ago, I lost my parents. 4 months ago, I nearly lost my future. What I've gained through this struggle is something no one can take away. The knowledge that I am stronger than I ever imagined, capable of standing up for myself even when it's terrifying, and worthy of the future my parents dreamed for me. The path forward isn't perfectly clear yet, but for the first time, it truly belongs to me. Not to my aunt and uncle's expectations or limitations. Not to financial constraints imposed by others' greed, but to my own choices, values, and dreams. My parents provided for my education because they understood its power to transform lives. In honoring their wishes, I've not only secured my college degree but learned lessons about justice, advocacy, and self-worth that no classroom could fully teach. The money was never just about money. It was about respect for my parents' wishes, respect for my autonomy, and ultimately, respect for the truth that we are all responsible for our actions and their consequences. I don't know if my aunt and uncle will ever fully understand the damage their betrayal caused. But I understand something vital. Sometimes fighting for justice isn't about punishment or revenge, but about restoring balance and honoring intentions that were always clear. Whatever comes next, I face it knowing my own worth is not determined by others' treatment of me, but by the integrity with which I navigate life's challenges. I closed the journal and looked out my window at the campus below. My journey was just beginning, but I was finally walking it on my own terms, perhaps the most valuable education of all. So, if you've stuck with me through this whole story, I'd love to know, have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone you once trusted? How did you find the courage? Drop a comment below and share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges and finding your own path. Remember, sometimes the hardest battles teach us the most important lessons about our own strength. Thank you for listening, and I hope my journey has offered some encouragement for whatever challenges you might be facing.